"Don't look now," John said to his wife, "but there are a couple of old girls 2 tables away who are trying to hypnotize me." Laura, quick on cue, made an elaborate pretense of yawning, then tilted her head as though searching the skies for a non-existent aeroplane. "Right behind you," he added. "That's why you can't turn round at once? It would be much too obvious." Laura played the oldest trick in the world and dropped her napkin, then bent to scrabble for it under her feet, sending a shooting glance over her left shoulder as she straightened once again. She sucked in her cheeks, the first telltale sign of suppressed hysteria, and lowered her head. "They're not old girls at all," she said. "They're male twins in drag." Her voice broke ominously, the prelude to uncontrolled laughter, and John quickly poured some more Chianti into her glass. "Pretend to choke," he said. "Then they won't notice. You know what it is? They're criminals doing the sights of Europe, changing sex at each stop. Twin sisters here on Torcello, twin brothers tomorrow in Venice, or even tonight parading arm in arm across the Piazza San Marco. Just a matter of switching clothes and wigs." "Jewel thieves or murderers?" asked Laura. "Oh, murderers, definitely. But why, I ask myself, have they picked on me?" The waiter made a diversion by bringing coffee and bearing away the fruit, which gave Laura time to banish hysteria and regain control. "I can't think," she said, "why we didn't notice them when we arrived. They stand out to high heaven. One couldn't fail." "That gang of Americans masked them," said John, "and the bearded man with a monocle who looked like a spy. It wasn't until they all went just now that I saw the twins. Oh God, the one with the shock of white hair has got her eye on me again." Laura took the powder compact from her bag and held it in front of her face, the mirror acting as a reflector. "I think it's me they're looking at, not you," she said. "Thank heaven I left my pearls with the manager at the hotel." She paused, dabbing the sides of her nose with powder. "The thing is," she said after a moment, "we've got them wrong. They're neither murderers nor thieves. They're a couple of pathetic old retired schoolmistresses on holiday who've saved up all their lives to visit Venice. They come from some place with a name like Wallabanga in Australia, and they're called Tilly and Tiny." Her voice, for the first time since they had come away, took on the old bubbling quality he loved, and the worried frown between her brows had vanished. At last, he thought, at last she's beginning to get over it. If I can keep this going, if we can pick up the familiar routine of jokes shared on holiday and at home, the ridiculous fantasies about people at other tables or staying in the hotel, or wandering in art galleries and churches, then everything will fall into place. Life will become as it was before, the wound will heal, she will forget. "You know," said Laura, "that really was a very good lunch. I did enjoy it." "Thank God," he thought, "thank God." Then he leant forward, speaking low in a conspirator's whisper. "One of them is going to the loo," he said. "Do you suppose he or she is going to change her wig?" "Don't say anything," Laura murmured. "I'll follow her and find out. She may have a suitcase tucked away there and she's going to switch clothes." She began to hum under her breath, the signal to her husband of content. The ghost was temporarily laid, and all because of the familiar holiday game, abandoned too long and now, through mere chance, blissfully recaptured. "Is she on her way?" asked Laura. "About to pass our table now," he told her. Seen on her own, the woman was not so remarkable. Tall, angular, aquiline features, with the close-cropped hair which was fashionably called an Eton crop. He seemed to remember in his mother's day, and about her person the stamp of that particular generation. She would be in her middle 60s, he supposed, the masculine shirt with collar and tie, sports jacket, gray tweed skirt coming to mid-calf, gray stockings and laced black shoes. He had seen the type on golf courses and at dog shows, invariably showing not sporting breeds but pugs, and if you came across them at a party in somebody's house, they were quicker on the draw with a cigarette lighter than he was himself, a mere male, with pocket matches. The general belief that they kept house with a more feminine, fluffy companion was not always true. Frequently they boasted and adored a golfing husband. No, the striking point about this particular individual was that there were two of them, identical twins cast in the same mold. The only difference was that the other one had whiter hair. "Supposing," murmured Laura, "when I find myself in the toilette beside her, she starts to strip?" "Depends on what is revealed," John answered. "If she's hermaphrodite, make a bolt for it. She might have a hypodermic syringe concealed and want to knock you out before you reach the door." Laura sucked in her cheeks once more and began to shake. Then, squaring her shoulders, she rose to her feet. "I simply must not laugh," she said. "And whatever you do, don't look at me when I come back, especially if we come out together." She picked up her bag and strolled self-consciously away from the table in pursuit of her prey. John poured the dregs of the Chianti into his glass and lit a cigarette. The sun blazed down upon the little garden of the restaurant. The Americans had left, and the monocled man and the family party at the far end. All was peace. The identical twin was sitting back in her chair with her eyes closed. Thank heaven, he thought, for this moment at any rate, when relaxation was possible, and Laura had been launched upon her foolish, harmless game. The holiday could yet turn into the cure she needed, blotting out, if only temporarily, the numb despair that had seized her since the child died. "She'll get over it," the doctor said. "They all get over it in time, and you have the boy." "I know," John had said, but the girl meant everything. She always did, right from the start. I don't know why. I suppose it was the difference in age. A boy of school age, and a tough one at that, is someone in his own right, not a baby of 5. Laura literally adored her. "Johnny and I were nowhere." "Give her time," repeated the doctor. "Give her time. And anyway, you're both young still. There'll be others. Another daughter. So easy to talk. How replace the life of a loved lost child with a dream? He knew Laura too well. Another child, another girl, would have her own qualities, a separate identity. She might even induce hostility because of this very fact. A usurper in the cradle, in the cot that had been Christine's. A chubby, flaxen replica of Johnny, not the little waxen, dark-haled sprite that had gone. He looked up over his glass of wine, and the woman was staring at him again. It was not the casual, idle glance of someone at a nearby table waiting for her companion to return, but something deeper, more intent, the prominent, light blue eyes oddly penetrating, giving him a sudden feeling of discomfort. Damn the woman. "All right, bloody stare if you must. 2 can play at that game." He blew a cloud of cigarette smoke into the air and smiled at her, he hoped offensively. She did not register. The blue eyes continued to hold his, so that he was obliged to look away himself, extinguish his cigarette, glance over his shoulder for the waiter, and call for the bill. Settling for this, and fumbling with the change, with a few casual remarks about the excellence of the meal, brought composure, but a prickly feeling on his scalp remained, and an odd sensation of unease. Then it went, as abruptly as it had started, and stealing a furtive glance at the other table, he saw that her eyes were closed again, and she was sleeping, or dozing, as she had done before. The waiter disappeared. All was still. Laura, he thought, glancing at his watch, is being a hell of a time, 10 minutes at least, something to tease her about anyway. He began to plan the form the joke would take, how the old dolly had stripped to her smalls, suggesting that Laura should do likewise, and then the manager had burst in upon them both, exclaiming in horror, the reputation of the restaurant damaged. The hint that unpleasant consequences might follow unless the whole exercise turning out to be a plant, an exercise in blackmail. He and Laura and the twins taken in a police launch back to Venice for questioning, 1/4 of an hour. Oh, come on, come on. There was a crunch of feet on the gravel. Laura's twin walked slowly past, alone. She crossed over to her table and stood there a moment, her tall, angular figure interposing itself between John and her sister. That she was saying something, but he couldn't catch the words. What was the accent, though? Scottish? Then she bent, offering an arm to the seated twin, and they moved away together across the garden to the break in the little hedge beyond. The twin who had stared at John leaning on her sister's arm. Here was the difference again. She was not quite so tall, and she stooped more. Perhaps she was arthritic. They disappeared out of sight, and John, becoming impatient, got up and was about to walk back into the hotel when Laura emerged. "Well, I must say you took your time," he began, and then stopped because of the expression on her face. "What's the matter? What's happened?" he asked. He could tell at once there was something wrong, almost as if she were in a state of shock. She blundered towards the table he had just vacated and sat down. He drew up a chair beside her, taking her hand. "Darling, what is it? Tell me, are you ill?" She shook her head and then turned and looked at him. The dazed expression he had noticed at first had given way to one of dawning confidence, almost of exultation. "It's quite wonderful," she said slowly. "The most wonderful thing that could possibly be. You see, she isn't dead. She's still with us. That's why they kept staring at us, those two sisters. They could see Christine." "Oh God," he thought. "It's what I've been dreading. She's going off her head. What do I do? How do I cope?" "Laura, sweet," he began, forcing a smile. "Look, shall we go? I've paid the bill. We can go and look at the cathedral and stroll around, and then it will be time to take off in that launch again for Venice." She wasn't listening, or at any rate, the words didn't penetrate. "John, love," she said, "I've got to tell you what happened. I followed her as we planned into the toilette place. She was combing her hair and I went into the loo and then came out and washed my hands in the basin. She was washing hers in the next basin. Suddenly, she turned and said to me in a strong Scots accent, 'Don't be unhappy anymore. My sister has seen your little girl. She was sitting between you and your husband, laughing.' Darling, I thought I was going to faint. I nearly did. Luckily, there was a chair, and I sat down and the woman bent over me and patted my head. I'm not sure of her exact words, but she said something about the moment of truth and joy being as sharp as a sword. But not to be afraid, all was well. But the sisters' vision had been so strong, they knew I had to be told, and that Christine wanted it." "Oh, John, don't look like that. I swear I'm not making it up. This is what she told me. It's all true." The desperate urgency in her voice made his heart sicken. He had to play along with her, agree, soothe, do anything to bring back some sense of calm. "Laura, darling, of course I believe you," he said. "Only it's a sort of shock, and I'm upset because you're upset. I'm happy, so happy that I can't put the feeling into words. You know what it's been like all these weeks, at home and everywhere we've been on holiday, though I tried to hide it from you. Now it's lifted, because I just know that the woman was right. Oh Lord, how awful of me. But I've forgotten their names. See, did tell me. You see, the thing is that she's a retired doctor. They come from Edinburgh, and the one who saw Christine went blind a few years ago. Although she's studied the occult all her life and been very psychic, it's only since going blind that she has really seen things, like a medium. They've had the most wonderful experiences. But to describe Christine as the blind one did to her sister, even down to the little blue and white dress with the puff sleeves that she wore at her birthday party, and to say she was smiling happily. Oh, darling, it's made me so happy I think I'm going to cry. No hysteria, nothing wild." She took a tissue from her bag and blew her nose, smiling at him. "I'm all right, you see. You don't have to worry. Neither of us need worry about anything anymore. Give me a cigarette." He took one from his packet and lighted it for her. She sounded normal, herself again. She wasn't trembling. And if this sudden belief was going to keep her happy, he couldn't possibly begrudge it. But he wished all the same it hadn't happened. There was something uncanny about thought reading, about telepathy. Scientists couldn't account for it. Nobody could, and this is what must have happened just now between Laura and the sisters. So the one who had been staring at him was blind. That accounted for the fixed gaze, which somehow was unpleasant in itself, creepy. Oh, hell, he thought. I wish we hadn't come here for lunch. Just chance? A flick of a coin between this, Torcello, and driving to Padua, and we had to choose Torcello. You didn't arrange to meet them again or anything, did you? He asked, trying to sound casual. No, darling. Why should I? Laura answered. I mean, there was nothing more they could tell me. The sister had her wonderful vision, and that was that. Anyway, they're moving on. Funnily enough, it's rather like our original game. They are going round the world before returning to Scotland. Only I said Australia, didn't I, the old dears? Anything less like murderers and jewel thieves. She had quite recovered. She stood up and looked about her. "Come on," she said. "Having come to Torcello, we must see the cathedral." They made their way from the restaurant across the open piazza, where the stalls had been set up with scarfs and trinkets and postcards, and so along the path to the cathedral. One of the ferry boats had just decanted a crowd of sightseers, many of whom had already found their way into Santa Maria Assunta. Laura, undaunted, asked her husband for the guidebook and, as had always been her custom in happier days, started to walk slowly through the cathedral, studying mosaics, columns, panels from left to right, while John, less interested because of his concern at what had just happened, followed close behind, keeping a weather eye alert for the twin sisters. There was no sign of them. Perhaps they had gone into the church of Santa Fosca close by. A sudden encounter would be embarrassing, quite apart from the effect it might have upon Laura. But the anonymous, shuffling tourists, intent upon culture, could not harm her. Although from his own point of view, they made artistic appreciation impossible. He could not concentrate. The cold, clear beauty of what he saw left him untouched, and when Laura touched his sleeve, pointing to the mosaic of the Virgin and Child standing above the frieze of the Apostles, he nodded in sympathy, yet saw nothing. The long, sad face of the Virgin infinitely remote, and turning on sudden impulse, stared back over the heads of the tourists towards the door, where frescoes of the blessed and the damned gave themselves to judgment. The twins were standing there, the blind one still holding on to her sister's arm, her sightless eyes fixed firmly upon him. He felt himself held, unable to move, and an impending sense of doom, of tragedy came upon him. His whole being sagged, as it were, in apathy, and he thought, "This is the end, there is no escape, no future." Then both sisters turned and went out of the cathedral, and the sensation vanished, leaving indignation in its wake and rising anger. How dare those two old fools practice their mediumistic tricks on him? It was fraudulent, unhealthy. This was probably the way they lived, touring the world, making everyone they met uncomfortable. Give them half a chance and they would have got money out of Laura, anything. He felt her tugging at his sleeve again. "Isn't she beautiful? So happy, so serene." "Who? What?" he asked. "The Madonna," she answered. "She has a magic quality. It goes right through to one. Don't you feel it too?" "I suppose so. I don't know. There are too many people around." She looked up at him, astonished. "What's that got to do with it? How funny you are." "Well, all right, let's get away from them. I want to buy some postcards anyway." Disappointed, she sensed his lack of interest and began to thread her way through the crowd of tourists to the door. "Come on," he said abruptly once they were outside. "There's plenty of time for postcards. Let's explore a bit." And he struck off from the path, which would have taken them back to the center where the little houses were, and the stalls and the drifting crowd of people, to a narrow way amongst uncultivated ground, beyond which he could see a sort of cutting or canal. The sight of water, limpid, pale, was a soothing contrast to the fierce sun above their heads. "I don't think this leads anywhere much," said Laura. "It's a bit muddy, too. One can't sit. Besides, there are more things the guidebook says we ought to see." "Oh, forget the book," he said impatiently, and pulling her down beside him on the bank above the cutting, put his arms round her. "It's the wrong time of day for sightseeing. Look, there's a rat swimming there the other side." He picked up a stone and threw it in the water, and the animal sank or somehow disappeared, and nothing was left but bubbles. "Don't," said Laura. "It's cruel, poor thing." And then suddenly, putting her hand on his knee, "Do you think Christine is sitting here beside us?" He did not answer at once. What was there to say? Would it be like this forever? "I expect so," he said slowly, "if you feel she is." The point was, remembering Christine before the onset of the fatal meningitis, she would have been running along the bank excitedly, throwing off her shoes, wanting to paddle, giving Laura a fit of apprehension. "Sweetheart, take care, come back." The woman said she was looking so happy, sitting beside us, smiling, said Laura. She got up, brushing her dress. Her mood changed to restlessness. "Come on, let's go back," she said. He followed her with a sinking heart. He knew she did not really want to buy postcards or see what remained to be seen. She wanted to go in search of the women again, not necessarily to talk, just to be near them. When they came to the open place by the stalls, he noticed that the crowd of tourists had thinned. There were only a few stragglers left, and the sisters were not amongst them. They must have joined the main body who had come to Torcello by the ferry service. A wave of relief seized him. "Look, there's a mass of postcards at the second stall," he said quickly. "And some eye-hack headscarves. Let me buy you a headscarf." "Darling, I've so many," she protested. "Don't waste your lire." "It isn't a waste. I'm in a buying mood. What about a basket? You know we never have enough baskets." "Or some lace. How about lace?" She allowed herself, laughing, to be dragged to the stall. While he rumpled through the goods spread out before them and chatted up the smiling woman who was selling her wares, his ferociously bad Italian making her smile the more. He knew it would give the body of tourists more time to walk to the landing stage and catch the ferry service, and the twin sisters would be out of sight and out of their life. "Never," said Laura some 20 minutes later, "has so much junk been piled into so small a basket." Her bubbling laugh reassuring him that all was well, he needn't worry anymore. The evil hour had passed. The launch from the Cipriani that had brought them from Venice was waiting by the landing stage. The passengers who had arrived with them, the Americans, the man with the monocle, were already assembled. Earlier, before setting out, he had thought the price for lunch and transport there and back decidedly steep. Now he grudged none of it, except that the outing to Torcello itself had been one of the major errors of this particular holiday in Venice. They stepped down into the launch, finding a place in the open, and the boat chugged away down the canal and into the lagoon. The ordinary ferry had gone before, steaming towards Murano, while their own craft headed past San Francesco del Deserto and so back direct to Venice. He put his arm around her once more, holding her close, and this time she responded, smiling up at him, her head on his shoulder. "It's been a lovely day," she said. "I shall never forget it, never. You know, darling, now at last I can begin to enjoy our holiday." He wanted to shout with relief. It's going to be all right, he decided. Let her believe what she likes, it doesn't matter. It makes her happy. The beauty of Venice rose before them, sharply outlined against the glowing sky, and there was still so much to see, wandering there together that might now be perfect because of her change of mood, the shadow having lifted, and aloud he began to discuss the evening to come, where they would dine, not the restaurant they usually went to near the Venice theater, but somewhere different, somewhere new. "Yes, but it must be cheap," she said, falling in with his mood, "because we've already spent so much today." Their hotel by the Grand Canal had a welcoming, comforting air. The clerk smiled as he handed over their key. The bedroom was familiar, like home, with Laura's things arranged neatly on the dressing table, but with it the little festive atmosphere of strangeness, of excitement, that only a holiday bedroom brings. This is ours for the moment, but no more. While we are in it, we bring it life. When we have gone, it no longer exists. It fades into anonymity. He turned on both taps in the bathroom, the water gushing into the bath, the steam rising. Now, he thought afterwards, now at last is the moment to make love. And he went back into the bedroom, and she understood, and opened her arms and smiled. Such blessed relief after all those weeks of restraint. "The thing is," she said later, fixing her earrings before the looking glass, "I'm not really terribly hungry. Shall we just be dull and eat in the dining room here?" "God, no!" he exclaimed, with all those rather dreary couple at the other tables. I'm ravenous. I'm also gay. I want to get rather sloshed. Not bright lights and music, surely. No, some small, dark, intimate cave, rather sinister, full of lovers with other people's wives. Sniffed Laura. We all know what that means. You'll spot some Italian lovely of 16 and smirk at her through dinner, while I'm stuck high and dry with a beastly man's broad back. They went out laughing into the warm, soft night, and the magic was about them everywhere. Let's walk, he said. Let's walk and work up an appetite for our gigantic meal. And inevitably they found themselves by the molo and the lapping gondolas, dancing upon the water, the lights everywhere blending with the darkness. There were other couples strolling for the same sake of aimless enjoyment, backwards, forwards, purposeless, and the inevitable sailors in groups, noisy, gesticulating, and dark-eyed girls whispering, clicking on high heels. The trouble is, said Laura, walking in Venice becomes compulsive once you start. Just over the next bridge, you say, and then the next one beckons. I'm sure there are no restaurants down here. We're almost at those public gardens where they hold the Biennale. Let's turn back. I know there's a restaurant somewhere near the Church of San Zaccaria. There's a little alleyways leading to it. Tell you what, said John. If we go down here by the arsenal and cross that bridge at the end and head left, we'll come upon San Zaccaria from the other side. We did it the other morning. Yes, but it was daylight then. We may lose our way. It's not very well lit. Don't fuss. I have an instinct for these things. They turned down the Fondamenta dell'Arsenale and crossed the little bridge short of the arsenal itself, and so on past the Church of San Martino. There were 2 canals ahead, one bearing right, the other left, with narrow streets beside them. John hesitated. Which one was it they had walked beside the day before? You see, protested Laura, we shall be lost, just as I said. Nonsense, replied John firmly. It's the left-hand one. I remember the little bridge. The canal was narrow. The houses on either side seemed to close in upon it, and in the daytime, with the sun's reflection on the water and the windows of the houses open, bedding upon the balconies, a canary singing in a cage, there had been an impression of warmth, of secluded shelter. Now, almost in darkness, the windows of the houses shuttered, the water dank. The scene appeared altogether different, neglected, poor, and the long, narrow boats moored to the slippery steps of cellar entrances looked like coffins. I swear I don't remember this bridge, said Laura, pausing and holding on to the rail. And I don't like the look of that alleyway beyond. There's a lamp halfway up, John told her. I know exactly where we are, not far from the Greek Quarter. They crossed the bridge and were about to plunge into the alleyways when they heard the cry. It came, surely, from one of the houses on the opposite side, but which one it was impossible to say. With the shutters closed, each one of them seemed dead. They turned and stared in the direction from which the sound had come. What was it? Whispered Laura. Some drunk or other, said John briefly. Come on. Less like a drunk than someone being strangled, and the choking cry suppressed as the grip held firm. We ought to call the police, said Laura. Oh, for heaven's sake, said John. Where did she think she was, Piccadilly? Well, I'm off at Sinister, she replied, and began to hurry away up the twisting alleyways. John hesitated, his eye caught by a small figure which suddenly crept from a cellar entrance below one of the opposite houses, and then jumped into a narrow boat below. It was a child, a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, wearing a short coat over her minute skirt, a pixie hood covering her head. There were 4 boats moored, line upon line, and she proceeded to jump from one to the other with surprising agility, intent, it would seem, upon escape. Once her foot slipped and he caught his breath, for she was within a few feet of the water, losing balance. Then she recovered and hopped onto the furthest boat. Bending, she tugged at the rope, which had the effect of swinging the boat's after end across the canal, almost touching the opposite side and another cellar entrance. about 30 feet from the spot where John stood watching her. Then the child jumped again, landing upon the cellar steps, and vanished into the house, the boat swinging back into mid-canal behind her. The whole episode could not have taken more than 4 minutes. Then he heard the quick patter of feet. Laura had returned. She had seen none of it, for which he felt unspeakably thankful. The sight of a child, a little girl, in what must have been near danger, her fear that the scene he had just witnessed was in some way a sequel to the alarming cry, might have had a disastrous effect on her overwrought nerves. "What are you doing?" she called. "I daren't go on without you. The wretched alley branches in 2 directions." "Sorry," he told her. "I'm coming." He took her arm and they walked briskly along the alley, John with an apparent confidence he did not possess. "There were no more cries, were there?" she asked. "No," he said. "No, nothing. I tell you it was some drunk." The alley led to a deserted campo behind a church, not a church he knew, and he led the way across, along another street and over a further bridge. "Wait a minute," he said. "I think we take this right-hand turning. It will lead us into the Greek quarter. The Church of San Giorgio is somewhere over there." She did not answer. She was beginning to lose faith. The place was like a maze. They might circle round and round forever and then find themselves back again near the bridge where they had heard the cry. Doggedly, he led her on, and then, surprisingly, with relief, he saw people walking in the lighted street ahead. There was a spire of a church. The surroundings became familiar. "There! I told you," he said. "That's San Zaccaria. We found it all right. Your restaurant can't be far away. And anyway, there would be other restaurants, somewhere to eat." At least here was the cheering glitter of lights, of movement, canals beside which people walked, the atmosphere of tourism. The letters Ristorante in blue lights shone like a beacon down a left-hand alley. "Is this your place?" he asked. "God knows," she said. "Who cares? Let's feed there anyway." And so, into the sudden blast of heated air and hum of voices, the smell of pasta, wine, waiters, jostling customers, laughter. "For 2? This way, please." Why, he thought, was one's British nationality always so obvious? A cramped little table and an enormous menu scribbled in an indecipherable mauve biro, with the waiter hovering, expecting the order forthwith. 2 very large Camparis with soda, John said. "Then we'll study the menu." He was not going to be rushed. He handed the bill of fare to Laura and looked about him. Mostly Italians, that meant the food would be good. Then he saw them. At the opposite side of the room, the twin sisters. They must have come into the restaurant hard upon Laura's and his own arrival, for they were only now sitting down, shedding their coats. The waiter hovering beside the table. John was seized with the irrational thought that this was no coincidence. The sisters had noticed them both in the street outside and had followed them in. Why, in the name of hell, should they have picked on this particular spot in the whole of Venice unless Laura herself, at Torcello, had suggested a further encounter? Or the sister had suggested it to her? "A smoke restaurant near the Church of San Zaccaria. We go there sometimes for dinner." It was Laura before the walk who had mentioned San Zaccaria. She was still intent upon the menu. She had not seen the sisters. But any moment now she would have chosen what she wanted to eat, and then she would raise her head and look across the room. If only the drinks would come. If only the waiter would bring the drinks. It would give Laura something to do. "You know, I was thinking," he said quickly, "we really ought to go to the garage tomorrow and get the car and do that drive to Padua. We could lunch in Padua, see the cathedral and touch St. Antony's tomb and look at the Giotto frescoes, and come back by way of those various villas along the Brenta that the guidebook cracks up." It was no use, though. She was looking up across the restaurant, and she gave a little gasp of surprise. It was genuine. He could swear it was genuine. "Look," she said. "How extraordinary! How really amazing!" "What?" he said sharply. "Why, there they are, my wonderful old twins. They've seen us, what's more. They're staring this way." She waved her hand, radiant, delighted. The sister she had spoken to at Torcello bowed and smiled. "False old bitch," he thought. "I know they followed us. Oh, darling, I must go and speak to them," she said impulsively, "just to tell them how happy I've been all day, thanks to them." "Oh, for heaven's sake," he said. "Look, here are the drinks, and we haven't ordered yet. Surely you can wait until later, until we've eaten." "I won't be a moment," she said. "And anyway, I want scampi, nothing first. I told you I wasn't hungry." She got up and, brushing past the waiter with the drinks, crossed the room. She might have been greeting the loved friends of years. He watched her bend over the table and shake them both by the hand, and because there was a vacant chair at their table, she drew it up and sat down, talking, smiling. Nor did the sisters seem surprised, at least not the one she knew, who nodded and talked back, while the blind sister remained impassive. "All right," thought John savagely, "then I will get sloshed." And he proceeded to down his Campari and soda and order another, while he pointed out something quite unintelligible on the menu as his own choice, but remembered scampi for Laura. "And a bottle of Soave," he added, "with ice." The evening was ruined anyway. What was to have been an intimate, happy celebration would now be heavy laden with spiritualistic visions. Poor little dead Christine sharing the table with them, which was so damned stupid when in earthly life she would have been tucked up hours ago in bed. The bitter taste of the Campari suited his mood of sudden self-pity, and all the while he watched the group at the table in the opposite corner. Laura apparently listening while the more active sister held forth, and the blind one sat silent, her formidable sightless eyes turned in his direction. "She's phony," he thought. "She's not blind at all. They're both of them frauds, and they could be males in drag after all, just as we pretended at Torcello, and they're after Laura." He began on his second Campari and soda. The two drinks, taken on an empty stomach, had an instant effect. Vision became blurred. And still Laura went on sitting at the other table, putting in a question now and again, while the active sister talked. The waiter appeared with the scampi, and a companion beside him to serve John's own order, which was totally unrecognizable, heaped with a livid sauce. "The signora does not come?" inquired the first waiter, and John shook his head grimly, pointing an unsteady finger across the room. "Tell the signora," he said carefully. "Her scampi will get cold." He stared down at the offering placed before him and prodded it delicately with a fork. The pallid sauce dissolved, revealing two enormous slices, rounds, of what appeared to be boiled pork bedecked with garlic. He forked a portion to his mouth and chewed, and yes, it was pork. Steamy, rich, the spicy sauce having turned it curiously sweet. He laid down his fork, pushing the plate away, and became aware of Laura, returning across the room and sitting beside him. She did not say anything, which was just as well, he thought, because he was too near nausea to answer. It wasn't just the drink, but reaction from the whole nightmare day. She began to eat her scampi, still not uttering. She did not seem to notice he was not eating. The waiter, hovering at his elbow, anxious, seemed aware that John's choice was somehow an error and discreetly removed the plate. "Bring me a green salad," murmured John, and even then Laura did not register surprise, or, as she might have done in more normal circumstances, accuse him of having had too much to drink. Finally, when she had finished her scampi and was sipping her wine, which John had waved away, to nibble at his salad in small mouthfuls like a sick rabbit, she began to speak. "Darling," she said, "I know you won't believe it, and it's rather frightening in a way, but after they left the restaurant in Torcello, the sisters went to the cathedral, as we did, although we didn't see them in that crowd. And the blind one had another vision. She said Christine was trying to tell her something about us, that we should be in danger if we stayed in Venice. Christine wanted us to go away as soon as possible. So that's it," he thought. "They think they can run our lives for us. This is to be our problem from henceforth. Do we eat? Do we get up? Do we go to bed? We must get in touch with the twin sisters. They will direct us." "Well," she said, "why don't you say something?" "Because," he answered. You are perfectly right, I don't believe it. Quite frankly, I judge your old sisters as being a couple of freaks, if nothing else. They're obviously unbalanced, and I'm sorry if this hurts you, but the fact is, they've found a sucker in you. You're being unfair, said Laura. They are genuine, I know it. I just know it. They were completely sincere in what they said. All right, granted, they're sincere, but that doesn't make them well-balanced. Honestly, darling, you meet that old girl for 10 minutes in a loo, she tells you she sees Christine sitting beside us. Well, anyone with a gift for telepathy could read your unconscious mind in an instant, and then, pleased with her success as any old psychic expert would be, she flings a further mood of ecstasy and wants to boot us out of Venice. Well, I'm sorry, but to hell with it. The room was no longer reeling. Anger had sobered him. If it would not put Laura to shame, he would get up and cross to their table and tell the old fools where they got off. I knew you would take it like this, said Laura unhappily. I told them you would. They said not to worry. As long as we left Venice tomorrow, everything would come all right. Oh, for God's sake, said John. He changed his mind and poured himself a glass of wine. After all, Laura went on, we have really seen the cream of Venice. I don't mind going on somewhere else, and if we stayed, I know it sounds silly, but I should have a nasty, nagging sort of feeling inside me, and I should keep thinking of darling Christine being unhappy and trying to tell us to go. Right, said John with ominous calm. That settles it. Go we will. I suggest we clear off to the hotel straight away and warn the reception we're leaving in the morning. Have you had enough to eat? Oh dear, sighed Laura. Don't take it like that. Look, why not come over and meet them, and then they can explain about the vision to you? Perhaps you would take it seriously then, especially as you are the one it most concerns. Christine is more worried over you than me, and the extraordinary thing is that the blind sister says you're psychic and don't know it. You are somehow en rapport with the unknown, and I'm not. Well, that's final, said John. I'm psychic, am I? My psychic intuition tells me to get out of this restaurant now at once, and we can decide what we do about leaving Venice when we are back at the hotel. He signaled to the waiter for the bill, and they waited for it, not speaking to each other, Laura, unhappy, fiddling with her bag, while John, glancing furtively at the twins' table, noticed that they were tucking into plates piled high with spaghetti in very unpsychic fashion. The bill disposed of, John pushed back his chair. Right. Are you ready? He asked. I'm going to say goodbye to them first, said Laura, her mouth set sulkily, reminding him instantly with a pang of their poor lost child. Just as you like, he replied, and walked ahead of her out of the restaurant without a backward glance. The soft humidity of the evening, so pleasant to walk about in earlier, had turned to rain. The strolling tourists had melted away. One or two people hurried by under umbrellas. This is what the inhabitants who live here see, he thought. This is the true life. Empty streets by night, the dank stillness of a stagnant canal beneath shuttered houses. The rest is a bright facade put on for show, glittering by sunlight. Laura joined him, and they walked away together in silence, and emerging presently behind the ducal palace, came out into the Piazza San Marco. The rain was heavy now, and they sought shelter with the few remaining stragglers under the colonnades. The orchestras had packed up for the evening. The tables were bare. Chairs had been turned upside down. The experts are right, he thought. Venice is sinking. The whole city is slowly dying. One day the tourists will travel here by boat to peer down into the waters, and they will see pillars and columns and marble far, far beneath them, slime and mud uncovering for brief moments a lost underworld of stone. Their heels made a ringing sound on the pavement, and the rain splashed from the gutterings above. A fine ending to an evening that had started with brave hope, with innocence. When they came to their hotel, Laura made straight for the lift, and John turned to the desk to ask the night porter for the key. The man handed him a telegram at the same time. John stared at it a moment. Laura was already in the lift. Then he opened the envelope and read the message. It was from the headmaster of Johnny's preparatory school. Johnny, under observation, suspected appendicitis in City Hospital here. No cause for alarm, but surgeon thought wise advise you, Charles Hill. He read the message twice, then walked slowly towards the lift, where Laura was waiting for him. He gave her the telegram. "This came when we were out," he said. "Not awfully good news." He pressed the lift button as she read the telegram. The lift stopped at the second floor and they got out. "Well, this decides it, doesn't it?" she said. "Here is the proof. We have to leave Venice because we're going home. It's Johnny who's in danger, not us. This is what Christine was trying to tell the twins." The first thing John did the following morning was to put a call through to the headmaster at the preparatory school. Then he gave notice of their departure to the reception manager, and they packed while they waited for the call. Neither of them referred to the events of the preceding day. It was not necessary. John knew the arrival of the telegram and the foreboding of danger from the sisters was coincidence, nothing more, but it was pointless to start an argument about it. Laura was convinced otherwise, but intuitively she knew it was best to keep her feelings to herself. During breakfast, they discussed ways and means of getting home. It should be possible to get themselves and the car onto the special car train that ran from Milan through to Calais, since it was early in the season. In any event, the headmaster had said there was no urgency. The call from England came while John was in the bathroom. Laura answered it. He came into the bedroom a few minutes later. She was still speaking, but he could tell from the expression in her eyes that she was anxious. "It's Mrs. Hill," she said. "Mr. Hill is in class. She says they reported from the hospital that Johnny had a restless night, and the surgeon may have to operate, but he doesn't want to unless it's absolutely necessary. They've taken x-rays, and the appendix is in a tricky position. It's not awfully straightforward."